Senator Banks.
Thank you, Chair. As I think everybody knows, and as the exchange between Senator Mazacott and Professor McKitrick showed, we are not experts. We have the privilege of listening to experts, and we've been doing that for 2.5 years, well, longer than that in some cases. But it will fall to us to make a decision of some kind. So we have to base our decisions on the evidence that we've heard from experts, from people who either know or who purport to know, that we find the most compelling. One of the things that I think we would all agree on, and you have demonstrated it, is that there is climate change. The question, with respect to Mr. Gore and others like him, boils down to the extent to which and how much, if any, we are contributing to it. And some of the evidence we've heard is that there's an exponential difference between what we're doing and what we are emitting that has occurred in about the last 100 or 150 years. That has, to some degree, skewed the question of how much are we having an effect on it. We have learned that all predictions are wrong, that all models are wrong, because the slightest deviation from them at the beginning becomes a very wide deviation when you go out sometimes weeks, sometimes decades, sometimes centuries. I personally believe in the precautionary principle to which Senator Mazacott referred. If I see that train coming down the road 90 miles an hour at me and nobody can absolutely prove that it's going to hit me, I will nonetheless probably take some evasive action, despite the fact that there isn't proof that it's going to hit me. So there are 4 basic scenarios based on the extremes that might help us decide what we're going to do. One is that we do nothing. I'm talking about extremes. We do nothing by way of mitigation. And at the same extreme, nothing happens. Everything's okay. There's no bad effect of climate change, or at least nothing that we can affect. If we place that bet, that's a big winner. We win all around. The second scenario is we do nothing, and the worst happens. And we have, as a result, an unlivable world. We leave our great-grandchildren in a situation in which they will be, at the very least, a lot less comfortable and perhaps in some difficulty. That's a big loser bet. The third possibility is we do everything. We spend ourselves into the poorhouse by trying to mitigate. Remember, we're talking about extremes. And nothing happens. We spend all that money, and it's a complete waste of money because we didn't have anything to do with it in the first place, and whatever's going to happen. That's a big loser. And the fourth scenario is we spend ourselves into the poorhouse trying to mitigate, and as a result, we save the world from what would otherwise have been a terrible disaster. That's a big win. We have economic chaos at the extreme, because we will have spent ourselves into the poorhouse, but we will have saved the world. So the 2 bets that are good ones are we do nothing, and nothing happens. That's bad. That's a good bet. And the other one is that we do everything and spend ourselves crazy and ruin our economies, but as a result, we save the world. Which, for our grandchildren and our great-grandchildren, from ecological disaster, where would we place our bet?
You've outlined what makes this a really impossible decision. I mean, I completely understand that you would throw up your hands and say you don't like any of the above. What I've proposed from an economic point of view is just maybe as a thought experiment, but you could actually do it. Suppose that you put a small carbon tax in place, and then you tied the value of that carbon tax to the atmospheric temperature measurements we get from weather satellites. Now, people are going to have to start forecasting what's going to happen to that tax. If they believe what you've heard today, they're going to say, well, that tax isn't going to go up, it might even go down, and so we're not going to worry about it. If they believe what the other group of scientists say, then they'll think, okay, that's going to start trending up pretty steeply in the next few years, so we better start changing our investment plans. You would, in effect, force people to decide what's the most credible story and build that into their decision-making starting today. But you wouldn't have had to commit one way or the other to who's right. Basically, you'd be making a choice that at the end of the day, you were right however it comes out. So if after 20 years the tax hasn't gone up, you can say, well, we didn't waste a lot of money on a non-problem, and if the tax did go up and people had to scale back their energy consumption, you can say, well, we got that one right, didn't we? So
Being right, whatever the outcome, is a thing that's very attractive to politicians. Sorry.
Yes, please do, sir.
Okay, I was
Yeah.
just going to say, well, but what if it gets colder? And so that's another scenario that we need to really think about. And,
Well, we've been very careful to talk about climate change, not global
yeah.
warming.
But one thing, for example, from my own research, is that climate change can occur very, very rapidly. Could warm very rapidly. Could cool very rapidly. So I think probably something we really, really should consider is to develop really robust adaptation strategies to deal with whatever Mother Nature might throw at us. To be able to deal with droughts, for example. For example, the Pacific Decadal Oscillation, only discovered in 1996. Okay, it's closely linked to something called the Palmer Drought Severity Index. Is something which impacts agriculture in the West. You have drier intervals. You have wetter intervals. You have to be able to adapt our policies to be able to deal with these situations when they come about. So that's something I think we really, really need to think about, is to deal with whatever changes might be occurring, whether it's warming or cooling, because climate does change. It can claim to change rapidly, and we have to appreciate that based on what we know from the geologic record.